He crawled toward me, hand outstretched, blue eyes filled with fear. I was just a boy with a stolen gun and enough anger to burn down the world. I shot twice. For 50 years, I believed that moment was buried in the Polish snow. I emigrated to Brazil, built a farm, had grandchildren, and every night I woke up sweating, hearing those 2 shots. Then, in 1994, a knock on the door. An elderly man with a German accent. He said, "My name is Heinrich Müller." He opened his shirt, 2 scars. My stomach dropped. The man I thought I had killed was alive, and he had spent decades looking for me. But he didn't say why, didn't say what he wanted. He just asked, "May I come in?" Stay with me until the end of this story. Because what happened on that porch, what Heinrich was carrying in that wooden box, and the words that finally came out of his mouth, will change the way you see war, guilt, and the impossible. Subscribe now, because you won't believe where this story goes. There are mornings when you wake up, and you know, even before opening your eyes, that the world is still in its place. The smell of coffee brewing in the kitchen, the distant song of the thrushes in the orange trees, the familiar creak of the rocking chair on the porch. That was one of those mornings. Or it was supposed to be. I was 92 years old. My knees ached when it rained. My hands trembled when I held my cup. But my routine was solid, predictable, safe. Strong coffee at 6 in the morning. A short walk through the coffee groves. Silence. Lots of silence. On weekends, my grandchildren would come and fill the house with noise. That kind of noise that reminds you you're still alive. But during the week, it was just me, the farm, and the ghosts I kept locked in the basement of my memory. Then came the knock. It wasn't a polite knock. It was insistent. 3 sharp, firm raps, as if whoever was on the other side knew exactly what they were looking for. I let the coffee grow cold on the table and walked to the door, my feet dragging on the wooden floor I had installed myself 40 years ago. I thought it was the mailman, or some lost salesman. I didn't think anything, really. I just opened the door, and there he was. An elderly man, stooped, thin white hair like cotton, but it was the eyes that froze me. Blue, penetrating, as if they carried decades of something I couldn't name. He wore a simple white shirt, worn brown pants, and held a straw hat in his hands with an almost reverent delicacy. He smiled, a sad, tired but genuine smile. "Herr Friedman?" The voice was hoarse, thick with a heavy German accent. My heart stopped. No one had called me that in 50 years. No one here knew where I really came from. No one asked. I was just Jakob, the quiet farmer who grew coffee and never spoke about the war. "Yes," I answered, and my voice came out smaller than I would have liked. "My name is Heinrich Müller." The name meant nothing, not right away. But then he did something that would split my world in 2. Without rushing, without ceremony, he unbuttoned his shirt and showed me the scars. 2 circular marks, faded by time, but unmistakable. One just below the left collarbone, another 4 fingers below it. Bullet marks, entry wounds. I knew those marks. I knew the angle. I knew the distance. I knew the tremor of my hand when I pulled the trigger, because they were my bullets. The air left my lungs as if someone had punched me in the stomach. My legs buckled. I grabbed the doorframe, trying to understand what I was seeing. The man I had killed, who I was, sure I had killed, was standing on my porch, alive, smiling, holding a straw hat. How? It was the only word I could form. He buttoned his shirt slowly, each button a small ritual. Then he raised his eyes to mine. "May I come in?" I should have said no. I should have closed the door. I should have run, screamed, done anything but what I did. But I was paralyzed, trapped between the present and 1944, between the farm in Minas Gerais and the frozen forest near Warsaw. I nodded. He came in, sat down at the kitchen table as if he had done it 1,000 times before. He accepted the cup of coffee that I, on autopilot, poured for him. And then he said, with a calm that terrified me, "I didn't come for revenge, Jacob. My name in his mouth sounded like a sentence. I came to thank you. Thank me. The words echoed in the empty kitchen. Thank me. The man I tried to kill had crossed the ocean, had searched for me for decades, had knocked on my door to thank me. I couldn't answer. I couldn't move. I just looked at him, at the deep wrinkles around his blue eyes, at the age-spotted hands holding the coffee cup, and I felt something I hadn't felt in 50 years. I felt the weight of that night descending on me like Polish snow. And I knew, in that exact moment, that everything I had built, the farm, the family, the careful silence, was about to crumble. Because the past doesn't die. It just waits at the door, with a straw hat in its hands and scars on its chest. That sentence froze me and dragged me back to the darkest night of my life. Suddenly, I'm no longer in the sunny kitchen in Minas Gerais. I'm in the forest. 1944, Polish winter, the kind that freezes the spit in your mouth before you can spit. I was 19 years old, weighed maybe 120 pounds soaking wet. My coat was torn in 3 places. My feet, wrapped in rags tied with wire, couldn't feel anything anymore. I was thin as a dry branch. We all were. We fought alongside the partisans, a band of boys, old men, farmers, teachers, anyone who still had enough anger left to hold a gun. We had no uniforms. We had no clear orders. We had only hatred and the forest. And the forest protected us, hid us, swallowed us when the Germans passed. That night, we had just ambushed a Nazi patrol near a dirt road. It was fast, chaotic. The sound of gunfire echoing through the pines, shouts in German, shouts in Polish, blood on the snow. I fired my Luger pistol, stolen from a dead soldier 3 weeks earlier, without aiming properly. Just pulled the trigger and prayed I'd hit someone before they hit me. When the silence came, it was heavy. The kind of silence that only exists after violence. I was shaking, not from the cold, from adrenaline, from terror, from relief at still being alive. The other partisans vanished into the trees, dragging weapons, ammunition, anything they could carry. I stayed behind. I always did. I was the youngest, the slowest, the one who still felt guilty looking at the bodies. That's when I saw him. He was about 20 yards from me, trying to crawl, leaving a dark trail of blood in the snow, his arms trembling with the effort. He wore a German uniform. The swastika on his arm shone in the faint moonlight. He couldn't have been more than 20 years old. Our eyes met, blue, clear as ice, and full of fear. He held his hand out toward me. I don't know if he was asking for help or trying to defend himself, but his hand was shaking so badly it looked like it was about to break. Bitte. His voice was a hoarse, broken whisper. Bitte. Hilf mir. I didn't speak German, but I didn't need to. I knew what he was asking for. Mercy. But all I could see was the uniform. That damned swastika. The symbol of everything that had destroyed my family. My mother, killed in a bombing. My father, taken by soldiers who wore that exact uniform. My little sister, vanished in some camp I didn't even know the name of. That uniform had torn away my childhood, my faith, my humanity, and now it was crawling toward me, bleeding, begging for pity. I raised the Luger. My hand was shaking so much the sight danced in the air. I still remember the weight of the gun, the cold metal against my sweaty palm, the sound of my own ragged breathing. He stopped crawling, closed his eyes, waited. I pulled the trigger, twice. The sound was deafening. It echoed through the forest like thunder. His body shuddered, tumbled onto its side, and lay still. I didn't wait to see if he was dead. I didn't check. I didn't think. I just turned my back and ran. I ran until my lungs burned, until my legs gave out, until I fell to my knees in the snow and threw up everything in my stomach, which was almost nothing. And when the vomiting stopped, when the shaking subsided, I heard it. The sound of those 2 shots, still echoing, still alive, as if the forest refused to let them go. I got up, wiped my mouth on my torn sleeve. and I swore to myself that I would never think about that boy again, about those blue eyes, about that outstretched hand. But some sounds don't die. Some gazes don't disappear. They just settle into the bottom of your soul and wait. I ran until my breath burned, but the sound of those 2 shots followed me for 50 years. It was the last time I looked back, until the past came to my door. I arrived in Brazil in 1947, Port of Santos, July, cold and damp, but nothing compared to the Polish winter. I got off the ship carrying a cardboard suitcase tied with rope and a secret that weighed more than any luggage. No one asked where I came from. No one wanted to know. The world was full of refugees, of men and women with empty stares and pasts that were better left unmentioned. I was just one more. I went to Minas Gerais because someone at the port said there was cheap land and work. I bought a piece of dry, rocky land that nobody wanted, and I started planting coffee. I knew nothing about coffee, but I knew how to work. I knew how to dig. I knew how to wake up before the sun and collapse after it set. The work was good. The work tired the body, and a tired body doesn't dream as much. I married in 1950. Maria, a quiet woman from a simple family who made homemade bread and didn't ask questions. She never asked about the scars on my back, never asked why I woke up screaming in the middle of the night, sweaty, trembling, muttering words in Polish she didn't understand. She just held my hand and waited for the shaking to pass. We had 3 children, 2 boys and a girl. I loved them in a way that hurt, because every time I looked at them, I thought of the German boy I had killed. He had a mother too, maybe siblings, maybe someone waiting for him in a bombed-out city. But I never told them, never said anything about the war. When they asked, I said I had worked on farms in Poland, that I had come to Brazil looking for opportunities, that the past didn't matter, and they believed me, because children believe their parents. But the ghost didn't believe me. He appeared on rainy nights, when the sound of the drops on the tin roof sounded like gunshots. He appeared when I saw blood, the blood of a slaughtered chicken, the blood of my son who fell off his horse. And suddenly I was back in the forest, staring at that red trail in the snow. I drank to forget. Cheap cachaça, the kind that burns your throat and numbs your brain. Maria found the empty bottles hidden in the shed, behind the coffee sacks, buried in the garden. She never said a word, just threw them away and made strong coffee the next morning. I went to priests. 3, 4. I lost count. I would enter the confessional, kneel and whisper, "Father, I killed a man." And they would answer with the same empty words, "War does terrible things to men. God forgives those who repent." But I didn't want God's forgiveness. I wanted to forget. I wanted to wake up one morning and not see those blue eyes staring at me from the darkness. I wanted that night to have never happened. So I worked harder, expanded the plantation, bought more land, built fences, sheds, a bigger house, kept my hands busy, kept my mind moving. Because stopping meant remembering, and remembering meant feeling. The years passed. The children grew up. Maria aged beside me, her dark hair turning to gray, her hands wrinkling like mine. Grandchildren came. Laughter filled the house. The farm prospered. And I pretended. I pretended for 50 years that the German boy never existed, that night was just a nightmare that would eventually fade. I pretended I was just Jakob, the quiet farmer, the gentle grandfather, the hard-working immigrant who built something from nothing. But late at night, when the house was silent and Maria slept beside me breathing softly, I would stare at the ceiling and hear the sound. 2 shots, echoing across 5 decades, across oceans, across everything I had built. Because you don't build a life on ashes. You build on top end of them, and the ashes never disappear. They just settle into the foundation, waiting. I thought the work would save me. That family would save me. That time would eventually erase everything. But some marks don't fade. Some ghosts don't leave. They just stay quiet, patient, waiting for the right moment to return. I thought I had escaped. But the past doesn't die, it just waits. And on that morning in 1994, the wait was finally over. Heinrich Müller sat on my porch, drinking coffee as if we were old friends reuniting after a long time. His wrinkled hands held the cup carefully, as if it were something precious. The steam rose slowly between us, forming spirals that vanished into the warm Minas Gerais air. I couldn't stop looking at him, at those blue eyes I had last seen in the forest, shining under the moonlight, full of fear and pleading. But they were different now, calm, serene. They carried deep wrinkles at the corners, marks of decades of smiles and worries. They weren't the eyes of a ghost. They were the eyes of a man who had lived, and that terrified me more than anything. "You want to know how I survived?" he said. It wasn't a question. It was a gentle statement, as if he already knew what was going through my mind. I nodded. I couldn't form words. He took a sip of coffee, paused, then began. The bullets pierced my left lung. They went in here. He touched his chest, just below the collarbone, and out my back. I fell in the snow and thought, this is how I die. At 20 years old, in a forest I don't even know the name of, far from home. His voice was soft, almost hypnotic. The German accent made the words heavy, deliberate. But I didn't die, not right away. It took hours for me to realize I was still breathing. The pain was indescribable, like someone had shoved hot coals into my chest. Every breath was agony. But I kept breathing. He stopped, looked at the horizon, at the coffee groves stretching as far as the eye could see. I crawled. I don't know for how long. Maybe 3 hours, maybe 6. Time didn't exist. There was only the snow, the blood, and the certainty that if I stopped moving, I would freeze before I bled to death. I felt my stomach churn. I could see him, that boy in the German uniform, dragging himself through the frozen forest, leaving a red trail behind him. Then I heard voices, Polish. I thought it was the end, that they would find me and finish the job. But they were peasants, a family living in a cabin hidden in the forest. They saw me, covered in blood, wearing a Nazi uniform, and they helped me anyway. He looked at me then, directly in the eyes. "Do you understand, Jakob? They risked their own lives. If the Germans had found out they were hiding a wounded soldier, they would have been executed. The whole family. But they hid me in the cellar, cleaned my wounds, fed me thin soup they barely had for themselves. I couldn't process it. I couldn't accept it. I was on the brink of death for months. High fever, delirium. I saw my mother, my brothers, my girlfriend in Berlin. And I saw you, that thin boy with the pistol shaking in his hand. Your eyes, full of fear, just as much fear as mine." He paused, took another sip of coffee. "When I truly woke up, the war was over. May 1945, I went back to Germany. Berlin was in ruins. My house, destroyed. My family, scattered. It took years to find them. My mother had survived. My brothers too. My girlfriend had married someone else." A sad smile crossed his face. "I rebuilt my life, got married, had children, then grandchildren. I worked as a carpenter, made furniture, tables, chairs, things that lasted. I lived a good life, Jakob, a life I shouldn't have had." He put the cup down on the table. The sound of porcelain against wood seemed too loud in the porch's silence. But I always carried a question. Who was the boy who shot me? And why, after everything, did I still dream about him? About those eyes full of terror, just as scared as mine. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I spent decades searching. Partisan records, war archives. I hired investigators, followed leads that went nowhere. And then, finally, I found your name. Jakob Friedman. Emigrated to Brazil. A farmer in Minas Gerais. He leaned forward, his blue eyes fixed on mine. So he asked me, "Do you remember me, Jakob?" My silence was answer enough, and he began to tell the story I had spent 50 years trying to forget. But Heinrich didn't tell my story. He told his. And that, somehow, was even worse. He rose slowly from the chair, his joints popping with the movement, and walked to the car parked in the farm's driveway, an old Volkswagen covered in road dust. He returned carrying a wooden box. It wasn't large, maybe the size of a shoebox, but from the way he held it, with both hands and an almost reverent delicacy, I knew it was heavy, not with physical weight, with emotional weight. He placed the box on the table between our coffee cups. "You want to know why I came?" he asked, his fingers tracing the outline of the dark wood, worn by time. I nodded. My voice was still trapped somewhere in my throat. "I spent 30 years looking for you, Jakob." 30 years. He opened the box. The smell of old paper and faded ink escaped. Inside, stacked carefully, were hundreds of letters. Yellowed envelopes. Thin, almost transparent paper. Some with torn edges, others stained, as if they had been wet and dried many times. "There are 247 letters," he said softly. "I counted, all written to you, to the partisan boy who shot me that night." He took one from the top. The date in the corner was faded, but still legible. March 12th, 1963. This was the first one. I wrote it 18 years after that night. I had just had my first child, and when I held that tiny baby in my arms, I thought, I shouldn't be here. I should have died in the snow. But I'm alive, and this miracle only exists because those peasants saved me. Because 2 bullets, for some reason, missed my heart. He placed the letter back in the box. I started writing because I needed to understand. Not you. Me. I needed to understand why I survived. Why those people risked everything to save an enemy soldier. Why after everything, I was still here. Heinrich pulled out another letter. This one more recent. 1987. I hired investigators, spent years' worth of savings, dug through war archives in Warsaw, Berlin, Moscow. Talked to veterans who could barely remember their own names, let alone a partisan boy in a forest. I followed leads that led to dead ends. I traveled all over Europe, then South America, Buenos Aires, São Paulo, Rio de Janeiro. He paused, looked at me, and every time a lead failed, I wrote another letter, trying to explain, trying to make you understand, even without knowing who or where you were, that I wasn't seeking revenge. I was seeking release. I finally found my voice. Hoarse, broken. Release from what? From surviving, he answered immediately. Jakob, you don't understand. I shouldn't be alive. Those bullets should have killed me. The snow should have frozen me. The partisans should have come back and finished the job. But I survived. And for 50 years, I carried the question, why? Why me? Why not the other soldiers who fell that night? His hands were shaking, holding the letters. I believed we were both prisoners of that night. Me, of an unexplainable survival. You, of an unforgivable guilt. And that if we met again, not as soldiers but as men, maybe we could be free. He placed the box near me, pushed it gently across the table. I never sent these letters because I had nowhere to send them. But I wrote everyone as if you would read it, as if somehow they would reach you across time and distance. I looked at the box. 247 letters. 50 years of unsaid words, of unasked for forgiveness, of absolution I never sought. Why did you need to find me? My voice was a whisper. Heinrich smiled, a sad, tired, but honest smile. Because you saved me that night, Jakob. I froze. I tried to kill you. Yes, but you failed. And that failure gave me an entire life. 50 years, children, grandchildren, love, work, joy. All of this exists because your hands trembled, because you were just a scared boy who shot and missed the heart. Tears streamed down my face. I didn't even realize when they started. You saved me that night. I only came to return the favor. But how can someone be saved by the man who tried to kill them? The question hung in the air between us, heavy as the humidity before rain. Heinrich didn't wait for my answer. Maybe he knew I didn't have one. Instead, he reached into the inner pocket of his coat and pulled out a worn leather wallet. He opened it carefully, as if handling something sacred, and began to take out photographs. Small, black and white, edges yellowed with time. The first photo showed a middle-aged woman smiling shyly at the camera. She wore a simple dress and held a bouquet of wildflowers. "My mother," Heinrich said softly. "Helga. She worked as a seamstress in Berlin, made wedding dresses for rich women who never invited her to the weddings." He placed the photo on the table, next to the box of letters. The second photo showed 3 boys, teenagers, standing in front of a brick house with narrow windows. "My brothers." Klaus, the oldest, was 22 when the war started. He was conscripted in 1940, died at Stalingrad. Franz, the middle one, lost a leg in France. Came home in 1943. I was the youngest. His voice was calm, but I could hear the fissure hidden beneath it, the old crack that never fully closed. The third photo made me stop breathing. It was a girl, maybe 18, dark hair in braids, a wide, genuine smile. She was holding a cat in her lap. "Greta," Heinrich whispered. "My girlfriend. We lived on the same street since we were children. She made bread at her father's bakery. Every morning, I'd pass by on my way to school just to see her. When I was conscripted in 1943, she made me promise I'd come back." He paused, swallowed hard. "I married her in 1948. We had 4 children. She died 3 years ago. Cancer." I stared at the photo, at that innocent smile, and I felt something inside me begin to crack. "I wasn't a Nazi, Jakob," Heinrich said, looking directly into my eyes. "Not by conviction, not by choice. I was 20 years old when I got the draft letter. I couldn't refuse. Deserters were executed, their families marked. My mother had already lost Klaus. She couldn't lose another son." He folded his hands on the table. His knuckles were swollen, old arthritis. "They sent me to the Eastern Front in November 1943. It was so cold our tears froze on our faces. I cried a lot those first few months. At night, in the barracks, when I thought no one was listening. But everyone was listening, because everyone was crying too." He took a deep breath. "There was a boy in my platoon, Peter, 17. Lied about his age to enlist because his father forced him. He couldn't take it. Deserted after 3 weeks. They found him hiding in a barn, shot him in front of all of us. As a lesson. The silence that followed was oppressive. I was scared, Jakob. Constantly, paralyzingly scared. Scared of dying. Scared of killing. Scared of going home and finding there was no home left. I wore that uniform because I had no choice. But I didn't believe in it. Never did. I wanted to scream. I wanted to say it didn't matter. That the uniform was all that mattered that night. That I had lost my family, my childhood, everything because of that damned symbol on his arm. But the words wouldn't come. Because I was looking at the photos, at the smiling mother, at the brothers standing in front of the house, at the girl with the cat. And suddenly, Heinrich was no longer the German soldier in the forest. He was just a boy who also had a mother, who had also been torn from his home, who had also cried alone in the dark. "Do you hate me?" Heinrich asked suddenly. "After everything, after 50 years, do you still hate me?" I opened my mouth, closed it, opened it again. "I want to hate you," I said finally, my voice trembling. "God knows how much I want to, because it would be easier. It would be simple. You wore that uniform. You represented everything that destroyed my life." I paused, looked at the photos scattered on the table. "But you were also just a boy. And to recognize that, to recognize your humanity, means confronting what I did. Not to a soldier, not to an enemy, to a person, to someone who had a mother waiting at home." The tears returned. I didn't try to hide them. Heinrich reached his hand across the table, not to comfort me, just to be present. "We both wore uniforms that night, Jakob. Yours wasn't made of cloth, but you wore it. The uniform of anger, of fear, of survival, and neither of us chose it. He asked me, "You were just a scared boy too, weren't you?" For the first time in 50 years, I couldn't lie. The words started to come out, not in an organized way, not with eloquence or control. They came out stumbling, torn, as if they had been ripped from a deep place where they had been buried for decades. "I was 19, I began, and my voice was already breaking. Thin, scared. I had no home to go back to. My family. My mother died in a bombing. My father was taken by soldiers wearing that uniform. My sister, I don't even know what happened to her. 8 years old, blonde hair, brown eyes, disappeared." I closed my eyes. I could see her small face looking out the window as the trucks pulled up on the street. I fought because I had nothing left, because anger was the only thing keeping me alive. Anger and the cold, always so cold. Heinrich remained silent, just listening. That night, after the ambush, I was alone. The others had already gone. And then I saw you, crawling, leaving that trail of red blood on the white snow. And all I could see was the uniform, that damn swastika. The tears started to fall. I didn't try to stop them. You held out your hand, and I saw your eyes. I saw the fear. The same fear I felt every night when I closed my eyes and wondered if I'd wake up the next day. But I couldn't see past the uniform. I couldn't see that you were just another boy. My voice was reduced to a hoarse whisper now. I raised the pistol. My hand was shaking so badly I could barely hold it. And I thought, if I don't do this, if I let you live, then everything that happened to my family means nothing. All the pain, all the loss, it needs a target. It needs revenge. I took a shuddering breath. The air burned in my lungs. So I shot, twice. And when you fell, when I saw your body still in the mud, I thought I would feel relief. I thought the anger would lessen. But it didn't. It only got worse. Because I saw your face. I saw you were no older than me. And I knew, in that exact moment, that I had crossed a line I could never come back from. I opened my eyes, looked at Heinrich through the tears. I ran. I ran until I couldn't breathe anymore. And then I threw up. Threw up until there was nothing left. But the sound of those shots, that sound never stopped. It echoed for 50 years, every night, in every nightmare, in every moment of silence. My voice failed completely. I covered my face with my hands. I got married, had children, built a life. But it was all built on you, on the boy I killed in the forest, or thought I had killed. Every joy I felt came with guilt. Every smile from my children reminded me you would never have children. Every sunrise reminded me that you had been left in the darkness. My hands were shaking violently now. I drank to forget. I confessed to priests who said God forgave me. But I didn't want God's forgiveness. I wanted the impossible. I wanted a do-over. I wanted to go back to that night and lower the gun. I wanted to see past the uniform. I wanted to be better than what the war had turned me into. Silence. A thick, heavy silence, freighted with 50 years of unspoken pain. Heinrich didn't move, didn't speak. He just let my words hang in the air between us, giving them the weight and respect they deserved. And then, slowly, he extended his hand. Not to shake, not to console with empty words. He just extended his hand across the wooden table, palm up, waiting. I looked at that hand, wrinkled, spotted with age, trembling slightly. The same hand that had reached out to me in the forest, so long ago, begging for mercy I didn't give. Something inside me broke. I reached out my own hand, also wrinkled, also trembling. And when our fingers touched, when our hands closed over each other, I felt something I hadn't felt in decades. Connection, humanity, understanding. Two hands, two sides of an insane war, joined over a simple table on a Brazilian farm, half a century later. Heinrich squeezed my hand firmly. His blue eyes, now misty, met mine, and then he whispered, with a gentleness that shattered me, "I forgive you. Now you need to forgive yourself. But how do you forgive yourself for the unforgivable? The question hung in the air unanswered as the sun began to set over the coffee groves. Heinrich didn't press. He just held my hand for another moment, then released it gently and leaned back in his chair. "May I stay?" he asked. "A few days? There's a hotel in town, I can—" "No." The word came out before I could think. "Stay here. I have a spare room." And so Heinrich Müller, the man I tried to kill 50 years ago, stayed in my home. The next 3 days were the strangest and most healing of my life. We walked through the coffee groves at dawn. Heinrich moved slowly, favoring the left side where the bullets had pierced his lung. I moved slowly too. My knees weren't what they used to be. "You've built something beautiful here," he said, stopping to look at the endless rows of coffee trees. "Life, growth, something that endures." I picked a few ripe beans and showed them to him. "Coffee," I said. "They take years to grow, need constant care, patience. And even then, a frost can kill everything in one night." Heinrich looked at me. "But you plant anyway." "Yes, I plant anyway." We ate dinner together, simple food, rice, beans, chicken that my neighbor had brought over. Heinrich ate slowly, savoring each bite as if it were the first meal after a long fast. "My grandchildren would ask why there are no potatoes," he said with a half smile. "Germans need potatoes." I laughed. It was a small, rusty laugh, but genuine, the first in a long time. "Tell me about them," I said. "Your grandchildren." His eyes lit up. He pulled out his wallet again, showing more photos. 4 children, smiling, playing, alive. "This is Thomas, 7, wants to be an astronaut. This is Emma, 10, plays the violin better than I ever could. This is—" He kept talking. And I listened. Really listened. Not as a man hearing about the descendants of his enemy, but as one grandfather listening to another grandfather brag about his joys. We talked about our children, our wives, the small tragedies and triumphs of an ordinary life. Heinrich told me how it took years, decades, to forgive. Not just me, but the entire war. "I went to therapy in the 60s, he said, staring into his coffee cup, when the nightmares got worse than I could bear. The therapist asked me, 'What is the anger giving you?' And I had no answer. The anger didn't bring my youth back. It didn't resurrect my brother. It just consumed me." He paused. "So I started letting go, piece by piece, day by day. It wasn't instant. It wasn't easy. Some days the anger would come back and I'd have to choose all over again. But I chose. Every day I chose to let go. I looked down at my hands, hands that held that pistol, hands that pulled the trigger. And the guilt? I asked in a low voice. How do you let go of the guilt?" Heinrich took a deep breath. "You understand that carrying guilt honors no one. It doesn't honor the ones who died. It doesn't honor the ones who survived. It just perpetuates the suffering. The war wants you to carry it forever. It's its last victory over you. And when you forgive yourself, you aren't saying what happened was right. You're saying you won't let that one moment define all the others." That night, for the first time in 50 years, I slept without nightmares. No forest, no snow, no blue eyes staring at me from the darkness. Just deep, peaceful sleep, the kind I hadn't known since before the war. I woke to the sun streaming through the window and the smell of fresh coffee. Heinrich was in the kitchen, making breakfast. "I hope you don't mind," he said, almost shyly. "I wake up early." "Me too," I replied. We ate in comfortable silence. And then Heinrich announced it was time for him to leave. "My flight is tomorrow from São Paulo. I need to get on the road." We walked to the car together. The same old Volkswagen, less dusty now after I'd washed it the day before. Before getting in, Heinrich reached into his pocket and pulled out an envelope. "For you," he said, placing it in my hands. I opened it. Inside was a photo. Heinrich surrounded by 4 children, all smiling broadly. His grandchildren. I turned the photo over. On the back, in shaky but careful handwriting, it said, Thank you for letting me live to meet them." My hands trembled holding the photo. Tears fell, staining the edges. Heinrich hugged me, a long, tight embrace of two old men who had survived the impossible. "Go with God, Jakob." "You too, Heinrich." He got in the car, started the engine, waved through the window, and he drove off, kicking up a cloud of red dust on the dirt road. When he left, he took with him the weight I had carried my entire life. But one question remained. What would I do with this freedom I never expected to deserve? The answer came 3 days after Heinrich's departure, when I found paper and a pen in my desk drawer. The same desk where I had filled out farm forms for decades, where I had signed documents, where I had calculated harvests and expenses. But I had never written about that night. I sat down. The chair creaked under my weight, and I began. "Dear 19-year-old Jacob." The words came slowly at first, stumbling, uncertain, like taking the first steps after a long paralysis. "You are in the forest now, cold, scared, angry enough to burn down the whole world. And I understand. God knows I understand. You've lost everything. Your family was torn from you by a war you didn't ask for, by a hatred you didn't plant." I paused, looked out the window. The coffee groves stretched out under the afternoon sun. "But I need to tell you something you'll only understand 50 years from now. That boy in the mud, that soldier you're about to shoot, he is not your enemy. Not really. He's just another scared boy, shoved into the same hell as you. And when you pull that trigger, you won't be killing the enemy. You'll be killing a part of yourself that will never fully heal." I wrote for hours. My hand ached. My vision blurred. But the words kept coming. I wrote to the boy I used to be, trying to explain, trying to forgive, trying to make peace with that version of myself I thought I had left in the forest. Then I wrote to Heinrich, not to send it. I didn't need to anymore, but to say the things I couldn't say when he was here. "You saved me, Heinrich, not by surviving those shots, but by coming here, by showing me that forgiveness is possible, that humanity can exist even after the worst we do to each other." And then, for the first time, I wrote to my grandchildren. "There is something you need to know about your grandfather." I told them everything. The war, the forest, the boy in the mud, the 50 years of silence, and the improbable miracle of Heinrich showing up at my door. I sealed the letters, addressed to each of them. The next morning, I went to the cemetery. Maria's grave was under a jabuticaba tree, where she always said she wanted to be buried. The stone was simple, her name, the dates, and beloved wife and mother. I knelt on the grass. My joints protested, but I ignored them. "Maria," I began, and my voice broke immediately. "There's something I never told you." And for the first time out loud, in the presence of the only person who had always known me without judgment, I told her about that night, about Heinrich, about everything. The words echoed in the empty cemetery. No one to hear, except the birds and the silent headstones. When I finished, I felt something let go. A knot that had been too tight for too long. "He forgave me, Maria. And I think you would have liked him." I went back home, past the bakery, the market, the bar where the men played dominoes on hot afternoons. And for the first time, I didn't hide my face. I didn't look away. So Manuel, who had known my family for 30 years, stopped beside me. "Everything all right, Jacob? You look different." I smiled. A tired but real smile. "I'm all right, Manuel. Better than I've been in a long time." He nodded, not fully understanding but respecting it nonetheless. In the following days, I began to notice something. The community, these neighbors who had watched me build a life here, welcomed me with a compassion I never knew was there, because it always had been. I just couldn't see it through the guilt. 2 weeks later, a letter arrived, German envelope, shaky handwriting. I opened it with anxious hands. "My dear Jacob," it began. "I arrived home safely. My grandchildren asked about the trip. I told them about you, about the coffee groves, about how 2 old soldiers finally found peace. I kept reading, smiling through tears. The last line said simply, "I'll see you on the other side, my friend." 3 months later, Heinrich died peacefully, and I understood that he had given me the greatest gift, the chance to live until the end. I'm 93 years old now. My voice is weak. My hands tremble when I hold this photo. Heinrich surrounded by his grandchildren, all smiling. It's faded and yellowed with time, but I can still see the joy in his eyes. And on the back, those handwritten words, "Thank you for letting me live to meet them." 2 bullets, fired over 50 years ago in a frozen forest near Warsaw. They created a prison of guilt, of nightmares, of silence. For half a century I carried the weight of the boy I thought I had killed. I carried it alone, in secret, until the past knocked on my door. And when it knocked, it didn't come with anger. It came with forgiveness. Heinrich crossed oceans to free me, not because I deserved it, but because he understood something it took me a lifetime to learn. That humanity only survives when we choose to see past the uniform, past the anger, past the pain. We weren't enemies that night. We were just 2 scared boys, pushed into a hell we didn't create. He wore a swastika. I carried a stolen pistol, but underneath it all, we were just kids wanting to go home. If you're listening to me now, if you carry guilt for something you did in war or in life, if you hurt someone and think you can never be forgiven, I need you to know, forgiveness is possible. Not because you deserve it, but because carrying that weight honors no one. It just perpetuates the suffering. Heinrich taught me that. He could have hated me. He should have hated me. But he chose to free me. And in freeing me, he freed himself. I look out the window now. The sun is rising over the coffee groves, golden, warm, alive. And for the first time in 50 years, I don't see the forest. I don't hear the shots. I don't feel the chill in my spine. I just see the life I built, imperfect, stained, but real. I walk through the coffee groves every morning now, slowly. My knees protest with every step, but I walk anyway, because every sunrise is a gift Heinrich gave me. Every breath is a second chance. This story, it's not something I read in a book. It's not fiction. It happened to me, and I kept it hidden for so long because I was ashamed, because I thought no one would understand. But Heinrich showed me that silence is the war's final victory over us, so I'm telling it now, so you'll know, so you'll understand. 2 soldiers, 2 sides of an insane war, a single broken humanity, mended by the improbable miracle of compassion. The war ended a long time ago, but inside of me it only ended when Heinrich knocked on my door. And when he left, he took with him the chains I had carried for decades. Now all that's left is gratitude, and the certainty that even in the deepest darkness, light can find a way. I walk through the coffee grove at dawn, alone, but no longer lonely. The farm is quiet under the golden Minas Gerais sky, and for the first time, this silence doesn't scare me. It's peace. If this story touched you in some way, if it made you think about forgiveness, about humanity, about the bridges we can build even after the worst, please leave your mark below. Subscribe, share, because stories like this need to be told. They need to be remembered. And you, could you forgive someone like that? Think about it.